Good evening, everyone. This is Reading for Charity. This is the third of the book reviews that we're doing. This time round, it's going to be The Mercy Boys by John Burnside. Before we start talking about the book, again, just a little bit about the Archie Foundation. The Archie Foundation is who I'm raising money for this particular run of Reading for Charity. It's a fantastic charity to raise money for. It's trying to help kids in the northeast of Scotland who have to be in hospital, for whatever reason. If you've ever been an adult in hospital, you know how scary it is. I'm lucky that I've only ever been in for something minor, and it was a terrifying experience. Imagine being a child going in there. It's so clinical. It's so cold. It's a horrible experience. And the Archie Foundation are doing their best to make a difference for sick kids in the northeast of Scotland. It's a fantastic charity. If you saw the Urwillies knocking around the northeast of Scotland, and in particular the Tayside area, last summer, that was the Archie Foundation. It made the papers. It made kind of worldwide news in small ways. It was a fantastic thing. It raised a whole heap of money, and so far we've raised a small sum of money, hoping to raise some more to help what they are doing. It's a great charity. I will link it in the description of the video. It's on the Facebook page for this. It's on the Just Giving page. If you've got any money in your pockets and you don't know what to do with it, please donate if you haven't already. Donate if you have, and let's just keep trying to raise some money for sick kids. It's a really, really good thing to do. Okay, so the book, Mercy Boys. What to say about this book? Yeah. I was all set to come out and go, I hate this book, it's terrible, it's useless, it's horrible. But then I've read an even worse one, so I've had to temper what I'm saying about this, so I have somewhere to go for the next one. The best thing I can say about this book is it compares to Trainspotting favourably. I think you have to kind of get that out of the way straight away. It's a story about four men who are all alcoholics, who are all addicts in one way or another. There's death, there's a little bit of drugs, and it's a Scottish author. The parallels with Trainspotting are always going to be there, and they're completely inescapable. But really, that's as far as the comparisons can go. The books are completely different things. For starter, Irving Welsh is a significantly different writer to Burnside. Burnside started off as a poet before moving into prose. This is his second novel he's written. I've not read the first one. But the description on the back of this book is that John Burnside explores the byway to hell that Bunyan describes in Pilgrim's Process, a road that descends relentlessly into murder, madness, and ritual sacrifice. It's almost true, that statement. Almost true, but we'll come back to that. So this is a hell inhabited by men, the hell that Dostoevsky calls the inability to love. And it's only at the end, when everything is lost, that Alan is permitted a fleeting and provisional taste of redemption in a grotesque moment of absurd and impossible love. I have even more issues with that last sentence. So the book itself is written everything is written very short, so every single scene is relatively short, and it's written all from the point of view of one of the four men in each of the scenes. Alan, Rob, Scotty and Junior are the four men. I will struggle remembering at least two of their names, because Scotty and Junior have very little actually to do in the entire book. Really, the book is about Alan and Rob. However, I struggle to actually split the four stories up in my head at all, because they're all so similar. Not the stories, there's no story to this book in any way, shape or form. But actually the characters all have the same voice. Internally, there's very little actual dialogue in the book. It's 260 something pages, I think. Yeah, 264 pages long, and there's maybe 100 lines of dialogue in the entirety of the book. all the scenes are very much about what the men think about the situation they're in and how they feel or don't feel, and then what they do. They don't really talk to each other much. They don't really talk to the minor characters in the book. They just kind of think and brood, and everyone around them is doing things. Whenever you're in the point of view of one of the characters, everyone else is active, and the point of view character is very passive. It's a strange way to do the book, because whenever you switch to a different point of view of one of the main characters, they suddenly become very passive, and everyone else is active. So Scotty and Junior, for example, when they're in the pub, they talk apparently incessantly to each other about any topic that comes into their heads. And yet when you finally get into point of view from Scotty, he's quiet and he's reserved. He's not talking, and he's not in that stage in the pub. He's being the opposite of the character that he is from other person's viewpoints. And I think that's part of my problem with this book. It's written very much as a series of vignettes that Burnside has then written a bit of prose around to try and tie them all up, which is why there's no real story. It's a series of small fleeting moments tied up together, bookended and then shoved into a book. There's no real story to this at all. Each of the 4 stories is, you can't really, I can't really understand why any of the men have the motivation that they have. You can vaguely understand why 2 of them are drinking, and it's again, abusive fathers or mental health issues. But the other 2 are just so devoid of any form of motivation or reason or decision making. You don't know why they're doing anything. You don't know why they drink. You don't know why any of them have married their wives at all. More to the point, you don't know why any of the wives have married the men. The men, as the back of the book says, that the inability to love, and there's not a single one of them who apparently loves their wife. To the extent where one of them's dead, one of them is bedridden, and appears catatonic whenever her husband is in the room, but yet still manages to toilet herself and feed herself when he's not in the house. It's a bizarre set of circumstances. The only wife that's really filled out in any way, shape, or form is Kathy, who is Rob's wife. Rob is he gets described as a psychopath in the book, as a sinner, a wrong-un. Someone who's wrong deep inside and will always be a sinner with no hope of redemption. That's how they describe him in the book. But the description is completely at odds with his actual character. He's not a wrong-un, he's not a sinner, he's just random. He decides to beat Kathy, his wife, and Malcolm, her cousin, to death because he failed to hang up a picture and his dogs are barking. And there's no description of the welling rage inside him. There's no description of, anger bursting out from his chest or whatever. There's no lead up to the murder. He walks through with a hammer, bludgeons him to death, and that's that. It's the writing around actually what happens is really, it's poor. I don't think Burnside has captured really what he wants to capture at all. I think he's captured some of the other bits and pieces surrounding their lives, just the minutiae and the way, the feelings that they have are interesting and well written, but in terms of a story, there's nothing there. There's no reason for them doing any of the things they do. Alan's, was it the grotesque moment of absurd and impossible love is essentially him deciding he's in love with a 12-year-old girl, and punishing himself for this by pouring boiling water over his hand. And then helping Rob once Rob has murdered his wife and her cousin to basically flee to Argyle. There's another point about Dundee, which I'll get to in a second. But his moment of impossible and grotesque love is something that's covered in a lot of other books, which is the Lolita basically conundrum. And Alan seems to handle it by going completely off the deep end. He realises this is a love that he doesn't want, so it stops becoming a beautiful, provisional taste of redemption, and becomes just him rejecting that throughout. the point I'm going to make about Dundee. This book was kind of suggested to me as a, as a Dundee book, a book about Dundee, and it plays a big part in it. It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. It mentions maybe 5 or 6 places in Dundee, and all the major action that actually happens to any of them happens outside of Dundee. So, Rob and Alan both die in Argyll. Rob from the sickness within him, which is, you think is probably cancer the way it's described. And Alan gets shot by a farmer completely randomly after a car crash. And again, the death is utterly meaningless. Rob basically murders a tramp, lies down, never gets back up again. Alan decides to leave Rob. He's had enough of his murdering ways. Runs off in the car, somehow runs off the road, clambers out the car and gets shot. And again, there's no redeeming quality, there's no learning moment there, there's absolutely no reason for it, other than, Burnside wanted him to die, or wanted to give him an ending and couldn't work out what the ending should be. The one with the most ridiculous death is Sconnier Jr. I can't remember which one it is. The two of them are almost indistinguishable from each other. Who decides he needs to get away from Dundee, he needs to get away from the Mercy Boys, needs to get away from it all, and travels down to Sheffield, just by, basically getting on a train and just going and see where he ends up. And in Sheffield he falls prey to, and I kid you not, a student version of a South American assassination cult, who gives him one perfect night while drugged up and then murders him in the morning. This is indeed what happens. He meets a girl in a bar, goes back to her place, gets drugged and then murdered by her flatmates, who are all wearing, South American facial makeup and ritually sacrifice him. And this comes out of absolutely nowhere. There's no lead up to this, there's no allegory to the end of this. It's just, I've had enough of this, lads. I'm off for a couple of days. Dum-dum-dum-dum, I'm dead. It's a farcical death, and when I read it, I absolutely cracked myself up at it. It's a ridiculous ending. I was planning on reading it a little bit from the book, but it's so silly. It's hard to. The one section I'm going to read is pretty much how a conclusion that pretty much all 4 characters in the book comes to throughout the book, and basically they decide that there's no such thing as free will, one or the other, that everything's laid out, their lives are just being lived the way that their lives were always going to be lived. And this is just a brief paragraph that pretty much talks about that. I'm going to remember to come back to paragraphs. He wasn't conscious of making decisions, probably because he wasn't. Everything had been decided already while he was sleeping, maybe, or during the farce of the previous day, or maybe it had been decided from the first. Maybe some things really were inevitable. People talked about free will, about how individual human beings have a choice of how to live their lives. They forgot that. As soon as you were born, things were starting to happen to you. Things happened when you were small and powerless and went on happening, while you tried to cope the best you could. Your character was formed right from the start by forces beyond your control. Nobody really had that much of a choice. You were who you were. No one could blame anyone for anything. You just had to decide what was possible and what wasn't. And that kind of sums up the entirety of the book. The characters don't wonder why things happen. They just, because I don't think Burnside can decide why things happen to them. Things just happen to them, and then they die. That paragraph also makes me remember one of the big problems I have with the writing in this book. That's probably the shortest paragraph in the entire book. There's paragraphs that span 4 or 5 pages. The writing is overladen, the sentences are humongous with multiple clauses and very few places to actually take a breather. And it's just, it's hard going to actually, keep your concentration for the entirety of a paragraph, because he doesn't let your brain breathe at any point. It's just like dum ba 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 dum. Next paragraph. It's knackering reading the book as it is. So in conclusion for the book, I've been down on it a lot, and so I need to say something positive about it. I can't really think of much that's positive about it. It's by a Scottish author. It's therefore worth reading. The lives of Scony and Junior are actually more interesting than Alan and Rob. They get far less screen time, but they're much more nuanced than the other two characters, and far more probably worthy of some of the time that Burnside should have spent on them. The deaths of three of the characters are completely pointless. And I think it's only Junior that's left, and he's finally free because his wife dies, the bedridden one. He just walks and finds her dead and walks back out and goes to the pub. Again, a completely pointless death, but it's not his. He's the only one who survives. I wouldn't recommend reading this book. I would read it if you want to. I wouldn't go out of your way to read it at all. It's still better than the one I'm going to be reviewing on Sunday. That's going to be an interesting review, definitely. So again, there's nobody in the chat. I wish there was. Please come along to these things. I start at 8. I've not been late yet. I thought I was going to be late today. I wasn't. Come along, get into the chat, talk to me about the book, especially if you've read the book before. Feel free to disagree with me. In fact, I'd be overjoyed if lots of people came in and told me how wrong I was and why, because then we could get a proper discussion going. Otherwise, these are only going to be kind of 15-16 minutes long, and that's just going to be a shame if we can't turn this into something a wee bit longer. But thank you very much for listening. Again, this is Reading for Charity. We're raising money for the Archie Foundation. It's a fantastic charity. The links to both the Facebook page and the Just Giving page will be in the description of the video. Please donate if you haven't already. Even if you have and you've got a couple of quid lying around, please donate again. It's all going to a fantastic cause. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you on Sunday for Animal, the autobiography of a woman's body. Yes.